Hi everyone. The purpose of this video is to give you a short, easy to remember repertoire for black when facing the Ponziani opening. The Ponziani is the opening e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, c3. Okay, the most common reply here is knight to f6 to attack the e4 pawn because white doesn't have the natural response knight to c3 to defend it. But instead of the most common move, I'm going to recommend playing the move d5, the second most common move, played about half as often. All right, now the move d5 attacks the e4 pawn right away, and whenever I play d5 on Lee chess against players of a similar strength, I've always, every time, faced e takes d5. Which is kind of strange because when looking at the Masters database, there are about 400 games in the database in this position, and only twice have Masters played this move, e takes d5. However, that's something you should be prepared for because a lot of us lower rated players seem to be attracted to that move. So here's my point of playing this d5. I'm not afraid of bringing my queen out to the center of the board because I don't lose the usual tempo with the move knight to c3 here. So my queen is actually quite powerfully placed. Often I do see the move d4 as a response here. If white doesn't play d4, you can just develop your pieces naturally. Our plan is to play our bishop out to g4 and castle queenside. And d4 is probably the most active response here by white. So it strikes at our center, it opens the diagonal for the dark square bishop, and it entices us to capture on d4. White would like to play an isolated queen's pawn position and vacate that c3 square for his knight, which can come out and gain a tempo on our queen. But we're not going to oblige him. We're not going to actually capture the pawn on d4. We're just going to play bishop g4. So we pin the knight, we threaten to take it and break apart the pawn structure on the king side. So you would generally face bishop to e2 here, breaking the pin and protecting that f3 square. Okay, then we'll castle queenside as intended, and we won't say too much more. Other than I'll show you what happens if white tries to harass our queen here. I have faced the move c4 once, and it seems like a good move because it's starting to expand these central pawns and it opens up that c3 square for that knight's natural development. Well, if you do face that move c4, a great square for your queen is on e4. So here it pins the e2 bishop, and it does threaten again to mess up the pawn structure by bishop takes f3, since white would have to recapture with the g-pawn. And if white decides to attack our queen again with knight c3, then we'll simply pin it with bishop to b4. And whenever white decides to get out of that pin, maybe by castling or bishop d2, then we will take that knight on c3 and keep our queen in the center a little bit longer. The queen is perfectly safe here. If necessary, it can retreat to g6, or you can capture on f3 and then move it over to h4. So black is doing fine in this position. When I check the engine, it gives me a score of 0.0. Okay, but let's back up and talk about other alternatives that you might face after playing this move d5. Okay, masters do not tend to take that pawn on d5. Instead, what they like to do is one of two moves, either bishop to a4 or bishop to b5, both with the intent of pinning the knight on c6 and threatening to win that pawn on e5. Let's take a look at bishop to b5 first, which doesn't seem to be as strong as queen to a4. Okay, if bishop to b5 is played to pin our knight and threaten our e5 pawn, I recommend just trading e-pawns by capturing on e4 and letting that white knight come to the e5 square. So white is now threatening to take twice on c6. We have to do something about that. If you want to play a really sharp game, you can get a good advantage here according to the engine on Lichess by playing queen to g5 and attack that g2 pawn. Queen to g5 also pins this knight. For example, if knight takes c6, then the queen can take the bishop on b5. So it's a move worth looking into, but when I looked into it, it seemed to be very complicated and double-edged, and you could easily make a mistake. So I'm going to opt to just play this very solidly with bishop to d7, and that doesn't give me an advantage anymore according to the engine, but it gives me 0.0. Okay, so here white would probably take the bishop pair by capturing on d7, and we'll capture back with our queen, and we're ready to castle queenside and just naturally develop. So we'll stop the line there. But let's go back and look at one more move. So after our move d5, the most common move in the Masters database is queen to a4, which has the same purpose of pinning the knight and threatening the e-pawn. But it seems to be stronger than bishop to b5 because the queen is more active than the bishop. There are some lines where, for example, if we did take this pawn on e4, like we did in the bishop b5 line, then there are some cases where the queen can recapture on e4. So the queen is more active than that bishop in pinning that knight. And because of that, we're going to play this very solidly. I recommend just playing f6 to defend our e5 pawn and not get into all the complications with d takes e4. Okay, after f6, let's talk about our development plan here. Okay, we're going to try to get our bishop out to e6, our other bishop out to d6, and then this knight can nestle behind on e7, and we can push our queen up to d7, and then we can choose which side of the board to castle on. And then we'll have a very solid, easy position to play. Okay, and white might let us accomplish that. In fact, the most commonly played move in the database here is d3, which looks a little passive to me, blocking in the light squared bishop, but it does support the e4 pawn, and it opens up a possible square for the dark squared bishop. But if d3 is played, we can continue on with our development plan. Be careful, though. You want to get this bishop out before that knight, of course, because you need to get that knight out behind the bishop. But you can't play this bishop out to d6 right now because your queen is currently defending the d5 pawn, so d5 would hang. So you have to develop your light square bishop first to protect d5. Then white might play bishop e2 to get ready to castle, and we can play bishop to d6 after that. So then we'll get our knight out to the e7 square, and our queen will move up to d7. Okay, so we'll stop the line there. I will mention one more possibility, though. After we play f6, white might not play so passively with d3. I think a more active move is bishop to b5. That's what I would play as white in that position. So now you're threatening to take on c6 here and win a pawn. So you have to do something about it. And it's not so you're not going to get that natural development anymore. For example, you don't want to play bishop to d7 here because your d5 pawn would hang. So I recommend protecting that knight with knight to e7, which unfortunately blocks in our dark squared bishop. But we will remain solid, and we will be able to untangle our development soon. And if white plays e takes d5 here, then we recapture with the queen, of course. And if that happens, then we're doing great because we're threatening to play a6 and resolve this situation with the pin on our knight. And then we'll be able to move this knight off of e7 and get our dark squared bishop into the game. Okay, so that is my short, simple antidote to the Ponziani. If you'd like to try it out, play through the moves, and quiz yourself on it, there will be a link in the description below the video. All right, thanks for watching.